begin in 3 minutes. If you could, please take a seat. Fill it up. And I thank you for complying.
You hand that to me.
Okay, I've read a lot about you.
Sounds good, I hope.
George Mitchell?
And Susan? I think George is in Arizona.
No, Howard's out of town too. Yeah. Oh, it's too bad. He's no doubt sailing with a solo grapes or something in Greece. I was supposed to go to Greece. To a conference in June and I backed out. I know. I saw it. Well, I saw it.
Oh, okay. Is this mic on? I will tell people there are seats open here in the front if you want to get a little bit closer. You're
Much more. Oh, what a beautiful place. Oh, man, I love it. We were regulars. Shut down. Exactly.
We don't have to do any work.
Right.
I've been there 3 times. Me too. I got a cousin who lives there. They married a Turk in this 35 years ago, and they're wonderful.
Not really.
Senator Johnson
Oh, they love it.
the Homeland Security Committee with the Senate.
Oh, those islands. They're just
And also the intergovernmental. He runs programs like this nationally. And he's also one of our senators for Wisconsin. Very successful businessman. Governor Oshkosh in that area.
So he has to juggle.
Yes, a lot of things. And now, where are you at?
Going to college? Okay, going to college.
Mitchell's
Right.
Once wrong, it's July.
Oh. And what year?
Freshman. I want to be a freshman.
Okay. And what major are you looking under?
Global affairs. I think.
So you're going to be looking at doing an internship internationally?
I really like the United Nations or the State Department.
State Department. I was delegate to the UN in 2002, the year of the child.
And how was it? Overall, how would you?
Oh, it's phenomenal. Challenging things, child soldiers, blood diamonds, things like that. It was the beginning of the whole human trafficking discussion. Education was like looking at countries all over the world. The UN was just like
It sort of died down a little bit.
and when you see,
In Milwaukee.
the chamber,
everybody who's in the hall now to try and take a seat so we can get the hearing. Appreciate that.
Nelson Mandela spoke. It's pretty historic.
Good evening. This hearing of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs is now called to order. I want to thank everybody in the audience for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend what I hope to be a very informative hearing. I want to thank our witnesses for their time and efforts. I've read all of your testimony. It's very thoughtful. I think it's going to be very helpful and will be informative. I certainly want to thank everybody here at St. Marcus. Henry Tyson, Principal, was very instrumental in helping set this thing up. Pastor Mark Jeske, whose office I invaded. I appreciate that, Pastor. And we have some student volunteers. I want to call them out: Joanne, Brielle, Justin, Alicia, Demia, and Ambria. Thank you all for your help and efforts. So give them a round of applause. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just explain the purpose of this hearing. It's really I have two main purposes. I generally have a written statement. I'll enter that in the record, and just like to speak extemporaneously here. The Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs has broad jurisdiction in terms of oversight over the entire federal government. We also have jurisdiction for the District of Columbia. And I think you may all know that District of Columbia has its own school choice program. It's called the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, and that is going to be coming up for reauthorization here in September. And that's something that my committee is highly interested in. And I thought, as we explore that reauthorization, I thought, what would be a better place than come here to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is really sort of the birthplace, the pioneer of school choice in the nation. And so we're really here today to explore the lessons learned within the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, which is its official name. And certainly give our hats off to people like Polly Williams, who's no longer with us, Dr. Howard Fuller, who could not be here today, and people like Susan and George Mitchell that were so instrumental, with a number of people on this panel as well, that were so instrumental in pioneering a concept that I don't think anybody, even supporters of this program here in Wisconsin, believe that we've got the perfect model. I come from a manufacturing background, a background of continuous improvement. You can always improve things, and I think this is, a very sincere attempt to take a look at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and how can we move forward to really provide the opportunities that we all seek. And maybe that's something of an opening statement I should make as well. Regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, I hope we actually have a broad spectrum of opinion here in this room today. Let's start out today's hearing with an area of agreement. That's certainly how I would start out my business negotiations in my 30-some years of experience in the private sector. I wouldn't start out negotiating by arguing. I would start out trying to figure out all the areas of agreement. So here's something we all agree on. We share the same goal. We all want a prosperous, a safe, and secure Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and America. We're concerned about each other. We all want every American, every Wisconsinite, every Milwaukeean to have the opportunity to build a good life for themselves or family. And let's face it, education is key to accessing that opportunity. Now, the other part of my jurisdiction of this committee is really oversight, as I said, over the District of Columbia. And that also is going to be a purpose. I'm a little concerned the Department of Justice has been conducting a 4-year investigation into Wisconsin DPI as it relates to their administration of the school choice program. So we want to explore that, and we've got a witness that will testify to that. Let me just tell you the 3 basic principles that guide my thinking on this subject. I truly believe that America has been and should be and will be a land of unlimited opportunity. That's the first guiding principle. The second guiding principle is I believe every child should have the opportunity to access a quality education. And if they are within a system that is not serving them well, they have to choose accessing a different system. And finally, the third principle is my unwavering belief, having participated in a free market system, in the ability and the benefits of a free market system to basically guarantee 3 things. You know, when I was in the plastics business, I would have loved to have been a monopolist. You know, nothing could have been easier, but because I had to compete in the marketplace, my prices were lower, my quality was higher, and my level of customer service was also higher. That's the 3 benefits that the free market system guarantees. But if you really want to drive quality, if you want a better result, if you want lower costs, free market competition actually works, and that's really what we're trying to interject with the school choice system. Address the basic principle that every child should and every parent should have the freedom to access a quality education, to access that opportunity, and understanding that it's the free market that's going to provide better results in the long term. Now, just so you understand my own experience involvement, growing up, I was educated in both the public system and the private system. I went to a Lutheran school, Missouri Synod Lutheran School, for about 3 years. Otherwise, it was all public education. In terms of my own children, they went to both public school as well as private school, the Catholic system in Oshkosh. And it was really when my daughter left the Catholic system and went back to Oshkosh North High School, I was called in by the principal, doing an exit interview, and really wanted to find out why my daughter left. And that began my involvement in the President's Advisory Council, really trying to do everything I could to help the Catholic school system in Oshkosh survive financially. It's always a struggle. It's a real struggle for private institutions. But just so we had a private competitive model or competitive alternative to the public school system, which is really quite good in Oshkosh as well. And then my involvement with the Catholic school system led to my becoming the business co-chair of the Partners in Education Council of our chamber, where we had all the stakeholders. And so I've really been involved in a very robust fashion for about 6 or 7 years prior to my deciding to run for the United States Senate. So this issue is very dear to my heart because it's such a basic and fundamental need. And so with that, I think we've really assembled a pretty good set of witnesses. I'll briefly introduce who we've got, and then before they testify, I'll give you a more robust introduction. But we've got Miss Justice Shorter, who is a graduate of Messemer High School. We have Brother Robert Smith, who is president and principal of Messemer High School. We have Diana Lopez, who is a graduate of St. Anthony's. We have Dr. John Whitty, who is pretty much the knowledge expert in conducting studies on trying to evaluate exactly how successful the choice program is. And then we have Richard Comer, who is a senior attorney at the Institute of Justice. So with that, I will say that when we conclude our hearing, if we have time, I have told St. Marcus that I won't invade their space for too long. We will probably have an open mic and allow members of the audience to come in here and make a 2-minute comment to also be involved in this process. And we will also hold the record open for additional testimony or written comments that you also want to make into the Senate hearing. So with that, it is the custom of this Senate committee to swear in witnesses. And I would also ask Mr. Henry Tyson to stand as well, because we may take some testimony from him later on. So if you all stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated. Our first witness will be Miss Justice Shorter. Ms. Shorter is a graduate of Messemer High School and a former participant in the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. Ms. Shorter went on to receive a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism from Marquette University and is an August 2015 candidate for a Master of Arts degree in Sustainable Development, International Policy and Management from the School of International Training Graduate Institute in Washington, D.C. Ms. Shorter.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a bit under the weather today. I'll be reciting my statement completely from memory, so please bear with me. I thank you in advance for your patience and your understanding. My educational experiences have taught me the importance of capacity, clarity, and equity. In the fall of 2004, my sight began to worsen. I realized that for the foreseeable future, I would be recognized as someone who was legally blind. At the time, I was already enrolled in the Parental program as a student at Messemer Catholic High School, a place where I was surrounded by caring and committed individuals who wanted to ensure that I would be able to succeed academically. Nevertheless, neither my family nor Mesmer could financially afford to ensure that I would be able to receive all of the accommodations to support my educational endeavors. My mother and I, therefore, needed to research resources, and we independently sought out funding from private donors. Thankfully, to reconnect with the former mentor who shared my story with the foundation, which provided me with additional scholarships. We were able to use that funding to purchase several pieces of assistive technology. Now, that technology, coupled with the love, support, attention, and time that I received from the staff at Mesmer, allowed me to truly thrive and excel academically in each of my courses. Mesmer also was later able to secure financial assistance from donors, which has immensely enhanced my educational pursuits, as well as the access that I had to adequate accommodations. After graduating from Mesmer, I went on to Marquette University, where I earned my bachelor's degree in journalism with minors in justice and peace studies, as well as entrepreneurship. During my time as an undergrad, I studied abroad in Cape Town, South Africa, where I focused on community development and social entrepreneurship, as well as in Uganda and Rwanda, where I studied peace and post-conflict reconciliation. In 1 month, next month, I will officially earn my master's degree in sustainable development with an emphasis on international policy and management from SIT Graduate Institute in Washington, D.C. These educational opportunities have reinforced belief in capacity, clarity, and equity. First, capacity. My family, the staff at Mesmer, my mentors, my supporters, all firmly believed in my capacity to compete academically and to conquer seemingly insurmountable odds. Students with disabilities can indeed achieve their academic aspirations. We have the capacity to contribute to classrooms, communities, the city of Milwaukee, the state of Wisconsin, the United States of America, as well as the rest of the world. Secondly, clarity. Initially, my mother and I were quite on where to go and what to do concerning educational issues associated with my visual impairment. Students with disabilities and their families must be properly informed on their rights as well as the educational options. I believe that the Department of Public Instruction should indeed provide all schools participating in the Parental Choice Program with the information that they need to raise awareness amongst parents about their educational choices, as well as all available resources for students with disabilities. Lastly, equity. While participating in the Parental Choice Program, I received the same voucher as all students, including those without disabilities, which did not fully account for the increased expenses associated with my visual impairment, which is why we had to seek out additional funding from outside sources. And thankfully, I was surrounded by great and phenomenal individuals who were able to help me navigate that process, but not all students have access to that, and I believe that they should. Consequently, I believe that students with disabilities who are voucher recipients should receive equitable access to state aid. We have to ensure that the Parental Choice Program fully considers and effectively incorporates the additional expenses associated with educating students with disabilities. This would allow for schools with the security and knowing that they would be able to financially support all of the reasonable accommodations consistently throughout a child's education, especially those children with disabilities. To be clear, I agree with the principal premise of the Parental Choice Program. We should all be able to make the very best choices for ourselves, our families, our future. However, the problem of students with disabilities not having adequate access to accommodations when attending private schools on vouchers funded by the state of Wisconsin must be rectified. Schools and parents should be secure in the knowledge that funding from the Parental Choice Program will complement rather than complicate the educational choices of students with disabilities. This program clearly has the ability to bring forth transformative change in the city of Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin. Moreover, if we focus on capacity, clarity, and equity, it has even greater potential to serve as a model of what a state of dedicated supporters, parents, educators, and legislators can do to ensure the empowerment of students in general and students with disabilities in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shorter. Our next witness will be Diana Lopez, and I would ask that you speak very closely into the microphone, but let me introduce you first. Ms. Lopez is a recent high school graduate of St. Anthony's High School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where she graduated third in her class. She plans to attend Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut this coming fall, where she will major in global affairs and minor in Arabic. She is also the recipient of the full tuition Gates Millennium Scholarship, which is earned by 1,000 minority students around the country. Ms. Lopez.
Hello. I am Diana Yvette Lopez, and I attended St. Anthony's School of Milwaukee, another choice school, from the 3rd grade to my high school graduation. My whole life has been a series of causes and effects, and I know this very well. With this in mind, I knew that in order to do well in life and to do what I wanted to do when I grew up, I needed to do well in school. I knew that becoming an archaeologist in Egypt would only be done if I planned it out meticulously. So at the age of about 9, I started Googling universities that specialized in Egyptology, and I knew that from then on, I would have to work as hard as I could to be the best in middle school and high school. But which middle school would prepare me the best for my future? Before going to St. Anthony's, I went to a nearby public school. Despite being less than 10 minutes apart from each other, it felt like a completely different world. At public school, I had always questioned why Christmas had to be called Xmas and why I couldn't sing Christmas songs. It felt weird that when I was in my community, a largely Hispanic community, everything seemed to revolve around going to church. But when I went to school, it was non-existent. When I asked about it, I was gently told to let it go. I was frustrated. Then one day, my grandma took me to pick up my uncle, only 4 years older than me, from his school, St. Anthony's. There, I saw a multitude of kids dressed in fancy uniforms and a bunch of artwork on the wall, like the prep schools I had seen in all the movies. On the overhead, as I walked in, there were prayers and announcements blasting, and it just clicked. I called my mom from my school office. I would get to dress up in the uniforms. And by dressing up in the business-like uniforms they had, I would be better prepared for when I had college interviews. Middle school was great. I got to learn about so many things, and this time I could ask as many questions about any religion, not just Catholicism, as I wanted. However, I never knew how valuable going to a private school with choice program was until I started looking for high schools. I had my sights on a school in Bayview here in Milwaukee. It was perfect. They taught French, much needed by archaeologists, and they had computer programming classes, something I thought was cool. I wanted it to go so badly, but the problem was a $12,000 tuition. I did everything I could. I applied for scholarships and got them all. I started saving my money, and I started promising my parents I would pay them back for my tuition once I was rich and famous. It just was not meant to be for me. My mom lost her job, and my little brother was born. My dad was about to lose his job, and we were all living paycheck to paycheck. One day, they sat me down and told me the reality, and in my mind, my whole future just crumbled. After I cried for days, I looked for alternatives. In the end, I chose to go to St. Anthony's, and because they had the choice program, I was able to go at no cost. In the end, I am happy I graduated from there, because not only did I receive a valuable and wholesome education, but it let my parents have some breathing space and not panic over paying tuition. But again, actions have consequences. Since I went to St. Anthony's, I was able to talk about religion. Many think that going to Catholic school means being oppressed and kept thinking inside the box. However, that is not the case. Naturally curious, I was able to ask about my religion and ask my religion teacher about the differences between the Muslim and Christian ideals. Suddenly, my dream of becoming an Egyptologist dissipated, and I became interested in global affairs. What if I had never been able to ask about religion? Would I have ever discovered my passion? Also, because my parents didn't have to pay for tuition, I was able to go to a summer program that revolved around international relations. I fell in love, and to this day I haven't wavered. During the summer program, there was a representative from Yale who gave a speech, and I got in contact with her. Never once did I think about going to the Ivy League. However, after talking to her, I was convinced I would try as hard as I could to get in. A few months ago, after weeks of grueling applications, I discovered that I got into Yale and every other school I applied to. Thank you. Now I'm going to Yale next fall to study global affairs and Arabic. But the point is, what if I had never gone to the summer program and met the woman from Yale because my parents had to pay for tuition? Going to choice school has opened up so much for me. I was able to go to the March for Life in Washington, D.C. this past winter, and I got to see firsthand a political movement. I have met so many people of the church who have lived all over the world and taught me how to speak in different phrases, in different languages, and who have time after time reinforced in me the idea of curiosity. My teachers care about me, and they are incredibly knowledgeable in their fields. I hear horror stories about neighboring schools having fights every day, and teachers that don't care about their students. I was never afraid of that happening at St. Anthony's. I was able to get the same quality education as someone of a higher socioeconomic standing without burdening my parents and their peace of mind. So to those who are thinking about signing your kids up for a choice school, think about the consequences of your actions. You are sending your child to don't have to worry about negligent teachers or fights every day, where they can ask the questions they want and where you can rest assured that they are receiving a quality education. To the school choice program, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask questions, for giving low-income families like my own a chance to receive a peace of mind, and for being that one step ahead in the road toward my future. I hope to make you proud.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Our next witness is Brother Robert Smith. Brother Smith was the president and principal of Mesmer Catholic Schools for 26 years. While leading Mesmer Catholic Schools, Brother Smith helped create the first independent K-12 Catholic school system in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, increased student enrollment at the Mesmer High School from 130 to over 700 students, renovate and build additions to 2 school campuses, and raise over $100 million in student scholarships. Brother Smith.
Thank you very much, Senator Johnson. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm happy to be here, and I hope you are too. Back during the times of the suffragette and abolitionist movements, there was a woman by the name of Sojourner Truth who freed many slaves harder than most men and wrote a very famous speech titled, "And Ain't I a Woman?" Sojourner Truth was illiterate, spoke broken Dutch, yet she met 2 presidents of the United States and was a teacher who had memorized the Bible. She was invited to come up north to preach at a church, and a group of ministers heard about it and sent word down, and they said, "You tell that woman if she comes up here to preach, we gonna burn down the church." And in her broken Dutch, Sojourner Truth sent word back, "You tell them men that if they burn down the church, old Sojourner gonna preach from on top of the ashes." Tonight, we're talking from on top of the ashes. Mesmer High School in 1984 was closed. It was reopened by a group of folks like you, parents and guardians, who want a high-quality school, a Catholic school, in the inner city of Milwaukee. What Henry and others have done here, those young ladies coming in nicely dressed, articulate, who shook your hand and looked you in the eye, are poor kids who have the ability, like Sojourner, like Diana, like Justice, to create dreams that will lead the city, state, country, and world. All they need is a chance. And that's what the Choice program was all about. There's no magic, there's no panacea about it. It's hard work, it's sacrifice, it's trusting them and trusting their parents and guardians to choose what school they want their children to attend. And that includes schools of every faith. It includes cyber schools. It includes homeschooling. It includes public schools. All of that is school choice. What has angered me over the years are some of the things that get said that are not misconceptions or mistakes, they're flat out lies. To say that private and religious schools do not educate students with disabilities is flat out wrong, and has been wrong for decades. If you don't believe me, there's a book that you can get on titled The Three Archbishops, written in the 1920s. In that book, Archbishop Sebastian Mesmer says, take our Catholic school students, test them, do as well or better than the public students, then let the money follow the student. Go and look at yearbooks of religious schools back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. You will see synagogues, Braille machines that were paid for by the religious schools. They didn't get reimbursed by anybody. They did it because they cared about the education of the student. At the end of the day, I don't care where a kid goes to school. And I've said that for decades. What I care about is that they and their parents and guardians get to choose a high-quality school, which can include a school of faith. When I hear people talking about, well, we care about our kids and education, I expect them to be talking about all kids in a state. See, the Choice program in Milwaukee started with under 1,000 students. In 1998, we added religious schools. Today, we've got over 22,000 students in Wisconsin, but we were the oldest and biggest school system for years. Today, there are 27 states in this country with choice programs. That's the miracle. And that's to the future. Before I got into education here, I came from Detroit, Michigan, and I was a parole agent. I got burned out from watching people go in and out of prison. There were three things that were common. Number one, most of the people coming in or out of prison were dropouts. Number two, they had drug or alcohol problems. And number three, they had at or below a third grade reading level. So anybody that doesn't understand that education and a bright future don't walk on the same line is missing a lot. We need good schools for everyone. And when I talk about education, public schools. There are excellent public schools in Milwaukee and around this country. But we need people to be open to educating all kids and all families, and let the parents and guardians and students make those choices. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Bob. Next witness is Dr. John Whitty. Dr. Whitty is a professor emeritus of political science and public affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Robert M. LaFollette School of Public Affairs. Dr. Whitty's research has focused on tax policy, politics, and education, including school choice, vouchers, and charter schools. Dr. Whitty is investigator for the School Choice Demonstration Project, which studied the longitudinal effects of the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. Dr. Whitty.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Senator, and it's nice to be back in Milwaukee. I spent a lot of time here. I was actually born here in 1946, and I left in 1951, we claimed, because the schools were so rotten. Wasn't true. My career has been studying the voucher program twice. 2 5-year stints, from 1990 to 1996, and then from 2006 to 2012. And I have taken the opportunity that was offered to me for this testimony to write a long paper this last week comparing those two. No, but we've never looked at both of those studies together. We've looked at them separately. So I'm going to give you a combination here of what happens. And I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to just say what everybody wants to know. Did it work? And what worked? Okay? And then I'm going to give you my normative perspective, and it'll be my own values, and I realize there's a lot of other room for other values involved with this because I am a little bit concerned about the direction of the voucher program today. First of all, test scores. Everybody wants test scores. Everybody complains about test scores, but boy, they sit up straight when you start talking to about them. I make my living doing it, modeling it, doing everything else, and I'm very suspicious of them. They have a lot of measurement error, a lot of problems with test scores. But the test score results have been flat in both times. There's complications that I could go into later, but more or less we have found out that the voucher program and comparison groups in the Milwaukee Public Schools do about the same on test scores. Sometimes reading's a little higher, sometimes math's a little higher, but overall they do about the same. And again, there's some complications. Parental satisfaction. There's other dimensions to what qualifies as a good education and what we produce. Parent satisfaction and student satisfaction have consistently across all 10 years, both the first study and the second study, been positive for the voucher program, and really wildly positive in many cases. And one of the interesting things is when you ask parents what they are most concerned about in the Milwaukee Public Schools and why they go to choice in the vouchers, it has to do with a couple of things: the quality of education, the quality of teachers, and safety and discipline within the schools. Those are the things that they're most satisfied with in the private schools, when they come to the private schools, those three dimensions. So it just flips around what they're most concerned about and why they're there. Another thing that we were not able to study the first time around because we didn't have the resources, to be fully honest about it, and we also only had K-8 schools in the first set of schools from 1990 to 96. This time when we began, I insisted that we get enough resources that we could follow kids through graduation. For me, if there's one measure of quality of education in America and one thing we should focus on, it's graduating from high school. Good things happen on average if you graduate from high school, and bad things, as just said, do not happen when you don't graduate from high school. We were able to track kids into graduation and then into college, four-year colleges, and we're still tracking the kids that began in 2006. The news is very good here. The graduation rates among voucher students are considerably higher than MPS, and we have done this very well. It's also important because there is very little measurement error actually in graduating from high school, where there is a lot of measurement error in test scores. The rates may not seem high, but if you're involved with inner city education, you'll know it's between 4% and we think closer to 7% higher graduation and 7% higher attainment in four-year colleges. They also tend to go to better colleges, and we've followed them now into their at the end of their sophomore year, and they have a high persistence rate, much higher than the average in the schools, and they're stretching out over the MPS kids that go to four-year colleges. That's a big, powerful finding. The first one, I think, for any voucher program, which they usually don't follow kids as far as we have. One other thing, there's another type of study that takes place within vouchers, and that has to do with what we call competition studies. And the Senator mentioned this, that's why I want to talk about this. Competition studies are basically, if you have competition from vouchers in an area, do the public schools get better? Okay? And we measure these a lot of different ways. There have been 4 studies in Milwaukee going back to 1998, actually, the first ones, and then our recent one has been done in 2010, sorry. All of those studies have been positive. There is a spillover effect into the public schools that's positive for vouchers. And the more voucher students and options there are around, the better the results. Okay? And they're not large, they're not really big, but they're statistically significant and they're always positive. There have also been a number of studies in Florida that found the same thing, so we've got a consistent range. Finally, one thing that's very important to me, and sort of my rub here, and Brother Bob mentioned it in the very beginning, when this program began, it was to give families that did not have opportunities, alternatives in the Milwaukee public schools to have an alternative that many middle-class white people had. And that is to leave, if they weren't satisfied with their public schools, they could either buy private school education or they could move to the suburbs, which I've studied here in Milwaukee as well, where the schools were much more positive. Poor African-American, primarily students, did not have those options. And the voucher program provided those opportunities for the first time in many cases. There were no charter schools around, remember, at that time. Okay? Now, and there's no question that over the years, these opportunities have been extended, and there have been many opportunities. The choice environment is much more positive today, certainly with places like Mesmer High School or this high school or a number of other places in the voucher program. But the vast majority of the schools in the voucher program, 110 of them, they provide choices. My problem is that when I was first asked to do this, my relatively liberal friends in Madison said, you're being snookered here. This is not providing opportunities for poor. The real intent here is to get the rich people who go to private schools to be subsidized. And I said, I hope that's not the case because I'm not in favor of subsidizing wealthy. I'm a little worried now that we were moving in that direction, to be honest. I was not in favor of lifting the income limit as high as they lifted it. They lifted it to 300% of the poverty line from 175%. Now, statewide, it's still at 175. 300% of the poverty line to be eligible for the voucher program is $70,000, $70,047 a year for a family of 4. $70,000 gets to be up there pretty high for people to buy their own private education. So I'm concerned about that. To this point, I don't think it's necessarily going to be that much of a problem, but if it goes that way, you go to what's called a universal voucher program. Most people in the United States have always schools for religious reasons. God bless them for that, okay? But it's not necessary that the government should, necessary for me, that the government should subsidize the people that can afford that. If they can't afford it, great, go to religious schools or non-religious schools. But if they can afford it, we're going to spend all of our money. And I think it's going to be drained. I think the potential is to drain away the choices from the people that need it the most. So that's my only concern. Otherwise, I'm very happy to be involved with this program all these years. I'm just proud that I made that decision years ago to do this. And I'm proud of being friends with Brother Bob. He's not only the greatest speaker. 20 years ago, I swore I'd never follow him on a stage again in speaking. He's also one hell of an administrator. He built Mesmer High School. I was in there the first time we met was in 1991, and there were 100 kids in that. And to be honest, he was hanging on like this, like a cat hangs out of the wall, because it was coming down. And now that school is just magnificent if you haven't been there, and also all the other schools that are. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Whitty. Our next witness is Richard Comer. Mr. Comer is a senior attorney for the Institute for Justice, where he litigates school choice cases in federal and state courts. Prior to joining the Institute, Mr. Comer worked as a career civil rights lawyer for the federal government, including the Departments of Education and Justice, and at the Equal Employment Opportunity. Mr. Comer.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here today for a wide variety of reasons. But I'd like to commend Senator for chairing this hearing because the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program holds a special place in the hearts of all of us who have advocated for some 25 years for school choice. I work at the Institute for Justice, a public interest law firm, and one of the things we do is we specialize in defending school choice programs. So our institute defended the Milwaukee program first in well, actually twice, both times in state court, all the way to the to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, where fortunately the program was upheld both times. School choice is an immensely important issue, but what makes it worthwhile for those of us who do this are sharing the stage with people like Justice Shorter or Diana Lopez, who have benefited from the school choice programs that we have defended in court.
Mr. Cromer, can you move a little closer to the mic?
Okay,
There you go. Or move the mic closer to you. There you go.
good. Is this better? Thank you. For me, coming here is, in a sense, coming full circle, because this is literally where modern school choice began, with a program that enrolled just over 300 children in, I think it was 7 private schools until one of them dropped out. That's pretty small. Today, as Brother Bob mentioned, there are 27 states that have over 40 school choice programs, and the 3 school children in the original program have become 300,000 children across the United States. This is an enormous success story, but what also has come full circle is that my first involvement with the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program way back in 1990 was an effort to kill the program by overregulation by Herbert Grover, who was the then superintendent of public instruction here in Milwaukee, who said that the private schools participating in the program were de facto public schools and subject to all of the federal civil rights requirements that public schools are subject to. This was a transparent effort to kill the program politically by forcing private schools out of the program. They wouldn't participate if they provide all of the same services and act like de facto public schools, because many of the federal regulations, I hate to say this, imposed by various federal agencies are part of why public education is the way it is today. And private schools, to offer an actual viable alternative, have to be different. That program, Senator Bob Caston from Milwaukee sent a letter to the Department of Education, where I was working at the time, asking whether Herb Grover was right and that the program had to act like the private schools had to be treated like public schools. The assignment to respond to that, I was at the Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights, but we had a cross-cutting task force of the special ed people, the Office of General Counsel, everyone, to try and determine, are private schools public schools if kids get vouchers? And our answer was clear. They are not. They are not subject to these laws in the same way that public schools are. Well, now, 25 years later, the Justice Department is investigating them PCP and trying again to say that through the Americans with Disabilities Act, that the public schools have to act like, that the private schools have to act like the public schools. They have done this through trying to force the Department of Public Instruction, DPI, to basically impose requirements on private schools very similar to what Herb Grover tried to do 25 years ago. This effort is no more well-founded legally than the original effort was, because for a number of reasons. It's inconsistent with the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's inconsistent with the department's own regulations implementing that act. It's inconsistent with the technical assistance manual the Department of Justice provides to people as to what their regulations mean and what the ADA requires. And it's pretty much inconsistent with common sense, because the rules of statutory instruction are, at bottom, are really just commonsensical rules. And under the ADA, there are two titles relevant to their investigation. Title II applies to public entities like DPI. Title III applies to private schools. The private schools that participate in the program under Title III are subject to a very different legal standard of what constitutes discrimination than a public school is, because private schools do not have unlimited access to public resources. They have access only to what the parents are provided by the program, and the parents school in in exchange for services. Now, Title III contains a broad exemption for religious schools. That exemption is not an exemption the Department of Justice created. It's an exemption the Congress created. And the Justice Department does not get to overcome that exemption in Title III by saying that DPI needs to enforce a different rule under Title II. I'm not going to get any more technical than that. But the legal rule is that the specific controls the general. It's not complicated when you're interpreting something and something is specific. What are the responsibilities of private religious schools? They are exempted. You don't get to interpret another part and say, oh no, because Wisconsin is giving money to individual families to spend at those schools, suddenly they become public schools. That theory was rejected by the Wisconsin Supreme Court in the original case here, and it should be rejected when the Department of Justice tries to impose it. This is unfortunately part of a pattern, because there is a second intervention by the same group of the Department of Justice, the Division's Economic Opportunities section, which has tried to throw a monkey wrench into Louisiana's statewide program, which is for students in the worst schools in Louisiana. And they have tried, by resurrecting a school desegregation case, to force Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, their DPI, to regulate and limit school choice for students otherwise eligible for the program, on the theory that because minuscule numbers of students are leaving supposedly integrated public schools for African American private schools, that this is undercutting school desegregation. It is an absurd theory. It is so lacking in just basic reasonableness that I don't think that the courts are going to let this stand. The third thing we have with respect to school choice programs is the District of Columbia program. The DC Opportunity Scholarship Program was modeled consciously on the Milwaukee program, as were inner city programs in Cleveland. And all of these programs are modeled on the success here in Milwaukee. And the DC program has shown the same sorts of success as Dr. Whitty has talked about here in Milwaukee. Improved graduation rates, improved parental satisfaction, all, I should add, at considerably less expense to the public taxpayer than the public schools. These children left at their parents' choice. Now, the administration, which has been quite enthusiastic about school choice when it involves public schools, has opposed continuation of the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, and it has tried to cause it to wither on the vine. It has only been through the active intervention of this committee, when it was previously chaired by Senator Joseph Lieberman, a Democrat from Connecticut, and the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, that the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program is still up and running and serving the thousands of children that it does. So I'd like to just close and again thank the senator for holding this hearing. Thank him for supporting school choice, and hopefully thank him for bringing the hammer down on the U.S. Department of Justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Comer. We also should thank Mr. Comer because he cut short a vacation in Maine with his family, and he's got a little makeup to do there. I want to break procedure a little bit. I'd like to ask Mr. Henry Tyson. Is it Dr. Tyson? Okay, Mr. Henry Tyson then. The principal of St. Marcus. They've been very helpful in obviously opening up their school to us here. It's been relatively disruptive, but we certainly appreciate it. I met with Mr. Tyson earlier today, and I just wanted him to share kind of his thoughts and the model here of St. Marcus that has worked. And Mr. Tyson, why don't you just go ahead and describe that and just have you two share during the question period. So, Mr. Tyson.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Thank you all, especially members of the public, for being here tonight, interested in this issue. Probably the best way for me to do that is to tell St. Marcus's story and how it fits in with what parents are looking for in our city. This school actually opened its doors in 1875, and by the late 1890s was serving 300 children on a relatively raggedy building that stood on this site until about 2002. In the 1960s, late 1960s, this neighborhood was decimated by the riots that took place, really centered on North Avenue and King Drive, just to our west. And there was white flight took place, and the historical Lutheran white middle-class population fled the city. The result of that was that by 1981, the student population had shrunk to just 54 children. And at that time, the conversation was about whether or not the congregation and the school should stay, or should it follow the previous student body out to the suburbs and elsewhere, or just close entirely. We got a new pastor in Pastor Mark Jeske, who, along with some congregation members, worked like crazy to rebuild the school and the congregation, such that by 1997 there were about 80 children in the school. And it was that year that the voucher program was opened up to parochial schools. St. Marcus jumped into the program that year, and by 2000 had just about 100 children in the school, and that brought the old building pretty much to capacity. So the congregation at that time, at about 2000, recognized that there was a huge need in our community, that parents were desperate for access to high-quality schools. And the school building at that time was filled to capacity, so they started a $5.5 million capital campaign. In 2003, we're able to open a new school building just on the other side of that wall that was designed for 300 children. And as they did that, as that school opened in 2003, it was accompanied by a very specific vision. And the vision was to create the best urban Christian school in America. And combined with that vision was a philosophy that was, like most good ideas, stolen from the KIPP schools, a national charter program that said we're not going to make excuses. There are no excuses for student failure. And so the congregation and the staff came together and said, what do we need to do to make sure that any child who walks through our doors is ultimately successful? And what that meant was to extend the school day. It went from 8 until 4:30. We needed to implement a Saturday school program, a 4-week summer school program. We needed to have evening programs, so for some students, we kept them here and we fed them dinner, and they took care of their homework here at school. And then we implemented a nationwide travel program for our middle school students so they could see for themselves the incredible opportunities that this country offers or should offer a single child. The bottom line is that parents loved it. And within 2 years of opening the 2003 building, the building was completely full and we had a growing waiting list. In response to that waiting list, in 2006, we started another capital campaign, which resulted in 2011 of the opening of the primary grades building, which is behind me, which houses 350 students. And then in 2013, this room, the Krier Center, to support the primary grades building. And then just last year, you would have thought if we just kept building, we'd eventually get to the bottom of the waiting list. Well, it just didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is because if you are, in particular, low income and African American, in this city, you are in a world of hurt. They recently looked at what they call the 80-80 data, which is they looked at all of the schools in our city that are 80% low income and 80% African American. 80% low income and 80% African American. They identified 95 schools, public, charter, and voucher, serving just under 30,000 children with an average reading proficiency of under 8%. So what we know is that if you're low income and African American in this city, the chances of your child being in a high quality school are extremely low. So it's no surprise that the parents kept on coming. So as it is today, we serve 860 students on 2 campuses. We opened a new campus last year, 4 blocks north of here. That campus and in the fall, we hope to build out that campus to serve 350 children. We follow to the T the state's random selection process, so we look blindly at all of the applicants. Approximately 10% of our students have formal IEPs. That's an individual education plan. It means that they have been identified by the district as a student with special needs. And yet, as Ms. Shorter clearly articulated, we receive $0 to meet the special needs of those students beyond the $7,200 voucher. That creates immense challenges for us. It means we have to go out of our way to raise the money to provide the services for those students. This coming year, we'll have 2 certified special education teachers and a host of other staff who support those students with special needs. We do track our students for 8 years after they graduate. We know that 93% graduate high school through a traditional high school model. And according to admittedly questionable testing data, we are amongst the highest performing schools amongst the 80 schools in Milwaukee. So the bottom line, as we've heard from Brother Bob and others, the bottom line is without schools like St. Marcus and St. Anthony's and Mesmer and Atonement and Notre Dame, Nativity Jesuit, Garden Homes, the Hope Schools, there would be thousands of children who would be trapped in failing schools. And so the program has become a lifeline for thousands of kids, many of whom have special needs. At the end of that, am compelled to say, because we live in such a divided city, that as a voucher leader and voucher advocate, I want to acknowledge that our public schools run some fantastic schools, as our voucher system, and some of the very worst schools in our city are voucher schools. And for those of you like me who are voucher proponents, just as the district has got to deal with its struggling schools, so have we. And the critical need is to get as many high-performing schools for as many kids as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyson. And again, thank you for all your efforts for making your facility available to us here. I have a host of questions. Let me, before I start asking questions, let me just get a sense from the audience. Would you raise your hand if you would like to take 2 minutes, is what we'll limit a comment to. How many people would be interested in that? Because that'll govern my... Okay, so a reasonable number, so I think that we'll be able to accommodate that. Let me go informal here, and I'd like to use first names and Bob. I'd like to start with you, Justice. Obviously, with somebody with a disability that I think we all are very pleased to see you, to a great extent, overcome. Can you just talk to us about the impediments you faced, both in public as well as in Mesmer School, with your blindness? Was there a difference, one way or the other, between what you experienced in private school?
I actually...
And then speak very close to the microphone so we can hear.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. I was able to receive, as I said, a ton of attention, a ton of time, and from the staff members at Mesmer Catholic High School, and they were later able to assist me with also securing additional financial assistance, which was immensely beneficial. However, students with disabilities have to encounter a slew of barriers, both formally and informally, both perceived and the range of issues that people never take into consideration. It takes a community to ensure that these students will be able to strive and thrive academically. You have to take into consideration the classroom atmosphere, the atmosphere of the entire school, the communities that they live in, the parents, their families. All of these different entities must come together collectively in order to ensure that these students have the capacity to succeed. I think we have to understand that students with disabilities are assets, not liabilities. And we need to understand the full potential of these individuals. Had someone not seen the capacity that I had people not acknowledged that, had people not supported that, I would not have been able to do half of the things that I have been able to do in my short lifetime. I'm only 25. However, I continue to encounter a number of graduate school, even as someone who can clearly articulate the things that I need at the age of 25 in graduate school. Now imagine if I was 5 years old or 10 years old, or at the time 14 years old when my sight initially began to worsen. The difficulty in simply acknowledging, for one, what was happening to me at the time, and two, what it was that I needed in order to succeed. But having individuals around me who could recognize the problem, but who could also help me find the resources, and not only find that information, but to actually access those resources, was absolutely imperative.
So did you see, so I didn't realize you lost your sight at about the age of 14, you started losing your sight?
Yes.
At the age of 14?
It began to worsen at 14, yes.
And you were in public school prior to that? I mean, during that time period? Or?
No, I was at Urban Day Middle School, which I believe at the time was a charter school. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But you started accessing the voucher system when you started going to Mesmer, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Again, were there, did you, I guess the question is really kind of a moot point then. You were school and you started losing your sight in the...
When I went to high school, yes. So when I was in middle school, I was able to effectively maneuver. My vision was not good whatsoever. However, I was not in need of many of the resources that were absolutely essential once I went to high school, because my sight began to worsen even more and I could no longer hide it or pretend as if it didn't exist. It was imperative to my learning.
So can you just tell us a little bit about your, and again, you've overcome an awful lot, and you've continued to gain education. Can you just tell us, really what you plan on doing now and with the rest of your life, what you aspire to be?
No pressure there. No, I graduate in August, and everyone has been asking me that question. But I am excited to applying for positions both domestically, the country, as well as internationally. I would love to continue working on issues related to international policy. During my time in DC, I've interned for World Learning, which is an international NGO, the Hunger Project, another international NGO, as well as Women Enabled International, which focuses on protecting the human rights of women and girls with disabilities worldwide. At present, I am doing an internship for the Department of State, their International Visitor Leadership Program, and I'm developing the disability inclusion guides for host families and organizations to use so that when visitors come, they can truly access all of the amazing things that America has to offer. So I will continue to be an advocate for disability issues, but that is not the only issue that I will work on. I intend to work on a plethora of different issues, whether it relates to disability or gender or racial minority issues, LGBT issues, a whole host of issues. So I'm hoping to secure employment after graduation.
Well, as you realize your aspirations, you're going to continue to inspire people. So again, thank you. We wish you all the best. Diana, you mentioned uniform. I thought that was interesting. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about what wearing a uniform did? I mean, just the effect it had. And again, if you'd speak very, very close to the mic so we can hear you.
Okay, so going to a public school, I could wear whatever I want. So in the morning, getting to school on time, it would be, what should I wear? And when my parents started to lose their jobs, we had to go to those centers to get clothes, and finding clothes that everyone else wore was very difficult. And so I often went to school embarrassed, and often went home crying and telling my mom, why can't you buy me new clothes? But when I went to St. Anthony's and saw the uniforms, I thought that it was going to prepare me for the future, because I had seen how presidents and ministers and everyone wears uniforms, and if I wore a uniform, I would have the same type of thinking as them, and in that way, I would be better prepared to do what I want.
Did you find that was kind of a common attitude among your classmates? Did people enjoy wearing the uniforms? Did they feel it was onerous, or what was the general attitude?
Most of them hated it, but
but they fell into line.
yeah, after graduating and talking to their friends from public schools, they had a kind of appreciation that they didn't have to wake up and figure out what they were going to wear in the morning. Instead, they could figure out where all their homework was and where to spend their money instead of buying clothes. So I think it was a general attitude of appreciation that we knew what we were going to wear, and we didn't have to worry about impressing everyone else. So.
Okay, great. You also mentioned in your testimony the word safety. Can you talk about that again? Just again, I'm always looking for comparison. Compare and contrast public versus your experience at St. Anthony's. Can you just talk a little bit about that aspect of the choice program?
While at St. Anthony's, I have friends who on their phones they would show videos of neighboring high schools and the fights that they would have there, and how they would be really intense and really violent, and all of us just went around and ran around the person who had the phone, and we all couldn't believe that something like that was happening not that far away from us. And we all kind of had this attitude that, thank God this doesn't happen here. So.
Well, great. Brother Bob, I mean, this kind of, certainly what I saw within the Catholic school system was a pretty nurturing environment. Again, and let me say, within the Oshkosh school system, which my kids also went to, I saw, being the co-chair of the Partners Education Council, I saw dedicated teachers across the board. people that were skilled and knew how to educate the kids in their community. But I did notice a difference, a more nurturing environment, certainly the ability to teach morals and values. Can you just talk about the environment within your school, the extent of parental involvement, again, and any kind of comparison of experience that you know about between that and the public situation?
Sure. I have always, Senator Johnson, been a part of the Paul Bear Bryant School of Education. He was the football Alabama, and he began each season by telling his players, be gone. My belief of every educator, every adult in a school building is you will treat every child as if he or she was your own. The minute you can't or won't do that, then you got to go. Because parents and guardians entrust the most precious thing they have, their children, to us. And a frown, a harsh word, ignoring a kid that's trying to answer a question or to get a need met, that's a... And you know what Justice was saying and answering your question about some of the challenges, simple things like winter weather, which is unpredictable in Wisconsin. I used to watch her out of my window when there was black ice, and I made sure our buildings and grounds people, as well as our former principal, Mr. Monday, made sure that that back area was clear and dry so that she and other students wouldn't slip. If there was an early day of school, we had to make sure that she was able to get her ride. Schools live by rules. We have an elevator in Mesmer. Students aren't allowed on the elevator. She was allowed on the elevator because there are 3 floors. For testing, you know, the tests are the way she needed someone to read directions or if there were color pictures, things like that. And so as an administrator, it's the job of an administrator to make sure that everybody else does what they're supposed to do, be the adults, and then with the students, and the parents and guardians. And you know, what Henry said earlier is absolutely true. Parents and guardians that I have known in this city and across this country want the best for their children. They hate nothing more than going to jails and prisons and funerals and hospitals, and they expect the educators and the other students in schools to treat their child as they treat their child. And that's what our jobs are, and they start the minute the kid gets to the minute they get home.
I want to talk a little bit about parental involvement. I'm going to transition from you to Dr. Whitty during this question, but again, it was my general sense, again, having attended as well as to both systems, that certainly the private school system really encouraged parental involvement. And I guess it's just my anecdotal belief is that involvement made a big difference. I mean, can you just talk about how, to what extent Mesmer encouraged parental involvement, kind of what your belief was, and then I'm going to turn it over to Professor Whitty. Is there any study that kind of backs up whatever our beliefs might be? But Brother Bob.
The key, Senator, is we tell students from day one that the adults run this building, and that means the faculty, staff, and parents. So just as the students at St. Marcus were out there greeting every person that walked in that door, we teach the students, you will treat every person with dignity, respect, and love, or you got to go. And it's really that simple. Parents and guardians do the same thing. And we expect that they will treat the teachers and other staff the exact same way as adults. It is irrelevant whether I've got a master's degree or a high school diploma. We're still adults, and the education of every single student is the responsibility of every single adult. Private schools, and in particular religious schools, have a lot less money than public schools. We don't have a tax base to operate on, which means there has to be a lot of volunteer work. It means tutoring, making sure your students do their homework, and it doesn't matter if you understand trigonometry or Spanish. It means that you have a responsibility, whether you go to the Khan Academies on the internet or whether you call up another parent and say, can you check my child's homework? The homework gets checked so that when that student comes to school the next morning, that they come. It also means that if you've got a problem in your family, that there's an illness or a death and you need money, that you talk to us. We don't have a lot of stuff, but we can do a little. Recently that 11-year-old boy who opened the door, he's a student from Burma, and these guys went in and shot the father. He was a student at St. Rose, St. Leo. The entire Mesmer community around, as well as Marquette High School, to help support funeral costs and other costs of that family because they're dirt poor. You do it not because you have to, but because you choose to.
You used a word, put a smile on my face, volunteer. We had one of the moms in our, that was her license plate. And she was one heck of a volunteer. Dr. Whitty, describe any kind of study results in terms of parental involvement in education?
Yeah, we extensively about parental involvement, both at the beginning in the first study with what they had in the public schools, and then also to compare it to the private schools. And we also asked public school parents. And we asked 3 types of parental involvement, basically, in organizations in school like PTAs, in activities in schools such as communicating and connecting to teachers and other things, and involvement at home.
Keep talking to the microphone directly.
And there's different dimensions of all, so they're very good measures. And in the first wave of studies, parental involvement was higher statistically and considerably higher in the private schools than in the public schools, and also higher when the people moved from public schools to private schools. The second wave of studies, it was higher in both in the formal ways in the school and in belonging to organizations and communicating with schools, but the parental involvement was slightly higher in the public schools at home. So there was an improvement there, and there was quite a change from the earlier period into the latter period. The other thing I'll say about the public schools is we asked parents to grade their schools around the country, A through F, right? Just like we grade kids, like you get graded at Yale, and like you get graded in high schools. So on a 4-point scale. And it turns out the first time around, the public schools had about a 2.8 average grade, a little between B and C, and 2.7 for the private schools. That's because the mention came here about the schools closing. In the first 2 years, it was rocky around here in the voucher program, because the courts had not yet approved it, so people thought it was going to get closed. And we had this very bad school, the Juanita Virgil Academy, which I can identify because we never got to do a case study of it, and it was that closed in the middle of the school. It was a terrible school. We had pictures of kids throwing wet toilet paper out of the windows at each other. That's the kind of order they had in Juanita Virgil Academy. So it had a bad reputation. Then it really paid for years. This last time around, the public schools graded out at 3.0, easy B, higher, and the private schools at 3.4. One other thing that's important about the 2 waves, it turns out the wave, which ended with about 1,500 students in 1995, almost all the students were black, okay, 92%. Okay, it was an African-American program. There were no Asian students, not a single Asian family that we could identify in the program. It's much more diversified now, with many more students, obviously, 20,000 students here rather than 1,500 at the end. And it's 57% African-American, 54% Hispanic, and then the rest is split. And there's 15% white, and then there's smaller numbers of both Asians and Native Americans. So it's a much more diverse program now than it was. The parents of the private school kids are still poorer, lower income than MPS parents. They were both times, but they have slightly higher education levels. Not too much the second time around, actually. They're very close, the parents have education. First time around, the MPCP parents, the public choice parents, were considerably more educated.
Now, having read your testimony, I understood most of it. That's the point. I mean, it's very complex. I mean, trying to study these, trying to come up with some kind of evaluation is just necessarily very difficult. But it did sound in your testimony that student attainment, graduation rates, that you found some real significance there that's been somewhat indisputable. Is that?
Nobody's disputed it. If anybody quibbles, they say, well, it's only 4% or 5 or 6 or 7%. We think it's closer to 7. 7% jump in graduation is big time.
Let me ask you what you mean by that, though. Is it going from 70 to 77%, or is it a point increase, or is it a percentage increase?
It's a percentage increase, and it's going to about 75% for the kids that are now graduating, compared to 69%. That's the range. Which we didn't make too much of because there's problems with if the kids stayed for 4 years in the private schools. In other words, they were in the private schools in 2006 and they were still in them in 2010. 93% graduation rate. 93%. Now, a lot of people attrit. There's a problem with this because, and you, Brother Bob knows this. The first year in high school for these kids, we discovered this time around, it didn't apply to the first two, was very difficult for because they took them under lottery conditions, and these kids were sometimes way behind. The private high schools tend not to give grades out free, okay? I don't know how else to say that. They got to earn those grades. So what happened after the first year, often the kids in private schools, because maybe they only got 2 credits, and they needed 6, because the private schools have high graduation rates, right? High graduation levels. You got to have 6 credits, 24 credits to graduate in most of these schools. So if they only got 1 or 2 credits after the first year, then what happens is they look around and they say, gee, how am I going to graduate on time? And they may go back. And the public schools have a lot of ways of getting through that are now what the private high schools do in advance, coming out of the 8th grade, kids got in the school, low test scores, for example, or low grades in the middle school, they'll summer school to try to catch them up. They put them in smaller classes, they put them in mentor. There's a whole series of things that we outline in our reports that the schools do to try to solve this problem, but they can't solve it all because often the kids come in so far behind.
Thank you. Just one last quick. You mentioned competition studies. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Anything definitive there in terms of does choice, even at this very minimal level? I need to point that out. There's only 3% of Wisconsin students K through 12 that are actually the school choice program. Now that is some competition in the public system, but it's pretty minimal competition. So anyway, what results have you found in terms of competition studies?
The competition now has more, Senator, because the voucher programs are one thing, but remember, we're looking at competition with charters.
Correct.
And with charters,
that's about 8.5%, I think.
Yep,
total.
you got a lot more in charters. Now, not in all these places, because a lot of places like in Oshkosh, you may not have that many. You have a lot of charters actually in Oshkosh.
Right.
But in some places you don't. My town of Fort Atkinson, where I was raised, we don't have charters.
But still, even there, it's about 8.5% of the population. Again, it's competition, but it's still it's under 10%.
But wherever it occurs, and it occurs mostly in the large cities, it's been positive, and it's consistent across the country. This is not just Milwaukee. This is not just Wisconsin. Florida has found 4 major studies of vouchers there, and they've all found competition effects. And they do them in different ways. What we did here, the last study done by a man named Jay Green, who was working with me, they did it very cleverly. They looked at the density of voucher schools. How many charter schools are close? The more charter schools are close to a public school, the higher the achievement gains of the public school.
Okay, so again, I guess you're basically confirming what my basic principle would be is competition actually works quality,
Yes.
even at a pretty minimal level. Because we are talking at a pretty minimal level of competition. This isn't like it's full competition. This is still pretty minimal.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
I think that's absolutely correct.
Thank you. Mr. Comer, I know opponents obviously will talk about public payments or public support for religious schools and the separation of church and state. Can you one thing I've always thought about is within our university system we have Pell Grants, we have student subsidized. Is there any legal difference between that type of public support for potentially, for example, Notre Dame or other religious universities religious high schools or K through 12 or K, lower level? And again, speak right into your microphone.
At this point, since we won a case called Zellman versus Simmons-Harris involving the Cleveland scholarship program, which was once again modeled on Milwaukee, there is no legal difference between higher education programs and lower education programs. For many, many years, in trying to explain what is school choice, we would always point to these programs at higher education, like Pell Grant programs. And almost every state has a Pell Grant-like program of state scholarships that have very similar eligibility requirements as the federal Pell Grant program. We use vouchers in housing programs. Section 8 housing is a voucher program. We have pre-K voucher programs. We have child care voucher programs. It was K-12 education that was unique in not having voucher programs and not allowing private religious schools to participate on an equal basis. The difference, of course, was K-12 education is the only place where we provide free public education. And because it was free and a monopoly, there were no competitive effects. And like any public monopoly or private monopoly, monopolists don't like competition. They don't want competition because it allows them to be inefficient. It allows them to get away with failure. Don't get me started on how public education requires failure to get more funding every year, but it is a system that rewards failure and is, just like other systems, based on the ignorance of the American public. Because if you knew what was being spent on children in the public schools per capita, you would be aghast in most states.
Well, let me give you some figures on that. In Milwaukee, it's about $12,000 per pupil. In Washington, D.C., it's $29,000. That's the most recent figure. Now, just real quick, I mean, think of if you had 20 students and you got $29,000 per student, that's almost $600,000. I mean, in the hands of an experienced educator, I think you do a pretty good job educating 20 kids for $600,000. But let me ask you, because in your testimony, your written testimony, you talked about, I think you raised this issue that with the Department of Justice investigation, with the way DPI is administering this program, in terms of disability discrimination, that would really be more the jurisdiction in the Department of Education, not Department of Justice. Can you just talk about that, the appropriateness or the legal jurisdiction of the Department of Justice to even be pressing this investigation?
Sure. The Americans with Disabilities Act covers pretty much everything, but it assigns to 8 different areas of enforcement to different federal agencies. Not surprisingly, education is generally assigned to the U.S. Department of Education, vested in the Office for Civil Rights, which is when I was at the Office for Civil Rights, we were answering the Milwaukee question way back in 1990 under the IDEA, which was a Department of Education program, and under Section 504. The IDEA says that for education, you're supposed to enforce it the way you do the IDEA and Section 504, which are Department of Education responsibilities in education, and generally everything education related is supposed to be done at the U.S. Department of Education. But in this particular case, there was no referral of the complaints that triggered this investigation to the U.S. Department of Education, which has considerable experience with these sort of handicap discrimination issues. Instead, it was held by the Department of Justice with no explanation why. I have no idea why they kept it. It's not really a violation of law not to send it to the U.S. Department of Education, but it left it in the hands of some people who, quite frankly, don't know what the hell they're doing, compared to sending it to people who actually generally know what they're doing.
We're going to try and get to the bottom of that. By the way, we did invite a representative from the Department of Justice to testify here, and they declined. Professor Whitty, before I forgot to ask you a little bit about in terms of just macro evaluations, and from my standpoint, for example, the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, there's 157,000 students that have applied. There's 6,252 vouchers that are granted. So people are applying at 2.5, 2.6 times the rate. So demand is 2.6 higher than supply. And then, again, it's incredibly complex trying to evaluate this. I got this little chart from School Choice Wisconsin, obviously an advocate. But I thought this is a pretty strong evaluator. As a business person, if I'm looking at a sales chart that looks like this, and I know it's hard to see, but let me just read off the results here. In the year 2000, 8,000 students took advantage of school choice. In 2005, it was almost 16,000. By 2010, it was 21,000. Last year, it was almost 30,000. That's, no matter what your studies say, no matter, the controversy over does it do a better job at better educational outcomes? This is a pretty strong indication that parents and the kids, the customers, obviously see value in their voting with their feet by accessing and taking advantage of the voucher program. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think that 29,000 might be applications. Is that, does it?
No, I believe this is total. This is Milwaukee plus Racine plus
Yes,
the rest
yes.
statewide program.
Yes, sure. Let me put it this way. 25 years ago, I started to study choice. And at that time, basically, there wasn't any choice. You went, and that was assignment came because if your address was on one side of the street, you went to that school. If it was on the other side of the street, you went to another one. And that's still a case in a lot of cases. So what's happened in the United States is just extraordinary. Now most of the people in Milwaukee actually choose a school that's not their neighborhood school, either through a charter school or the Chapter 220 program that's still going. That's still going out there. That sends kids to the suburbs from the city or from the voucher program. So it's an extraordinary situation that Milwaukee has done. And the change over time is just amazing. It's actually hard to figure out who is in MPS anymore because charter schools are in some cases they're on the books. If they go to the Chapter 220 program, they're still on the books in MPS. So it's really kind of difficult to even get the numbers of kids. So you've got an unbelievably changed environment. And in fact, a lot of the times when kids go back to MPS from the private schools, it's because there's no slots. They run out of slots at the high school level or even sometimes at the middle school level. So there aren't enough positions. And, Henry was saying about how they're expanding so fast. It's amazing what's happening with these schools, and they can't keep up. They can't keep up. The good schools can't keep up. They can't expand fast enough. And you literally, unless you want to go to a virtual world, still bricks and mortar matter. And you don't want to have, 50 kids in a classroom to do it. Maybe we should go back to that. Years ago, the Catholic schools had 40 kids in the classroom. They did pretty darn well. But no, it's greatly expanded, and that certainly is an indication.
So, Mr. Tyson, if you quick grab the mic there. As long as we're talking about waiting lists, just real quickly, out of your student body of about 800, you said?
860.
What's your waiting list?
It's somewhere around 300, 340.
So almost 35-40% are waiting to get into the system. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask...
What's Mesmer's?
It's a good question. I retired in 2012.
Do you remember what it was then?
I'm sorry?
Do you remember what it was then?
The high school, probably 150, 200. The elementary schools, boy.
Higher? More than that?
Yeah, it was more than that.
Out of what total?
I can tell you the K4, K5, and first grade were extremely high, almost 2 to 1 for every student that was accepted. And there were 2 classes of every grade.
So the demand definitely outstrips the supply, which again, I would say if I were judging the success of a program, I'd say the demand outstripping supply by that much is certainly evaluated. What I'm going to do, because again, I want to be respectful of St. Mark's time here, is I do want to give those audience members a chance to make comments. Start lining up. Where are we going to set up the microphone? And while you're doing that, so if you want to ask questions, start lining up over here. And then I'm going to ask a couple questions of Mr. Tyson and Brother Bob here as well. We talked about the individual education plan. Can you describe, in the public school system, when a child gets an individual education plan, then they get the funding to provide those services, correct? Can you just give us some sort of how much additional funds go into a public school versus, people on vouchers? You get the 7,200 voucher and that's it.
Yeah, if I may just dismiss the students, St. Marcus students, you guys are good to go. Some of your parents may be waiting, so you can just, nice job, by the way.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you very
staying
much.
focused.
I love the uniforms.
Senator, I don't have a real definitive answer to that question, simply because, as you've stated, in our experience, when we have those children with special needs, there are no dollars. So for us, it's a moot point. Now, from what I understand, in the public sector, the amount of money that is available to educate the child depends upon the severity of the need. So if you go to Ginsland Elementary School, MPS, just up the street, absolutely phenomenal school with their special needs population. They have some kids that have 2 adults on 1 child, and it's tens of thousands of dollars.
So bottom line, we already have a system in the state of Wisconsin to accommodate those with disabilities, provide the funding to provide the services within the public system. That'd be, I would think, pretty transferable. Again, this is a state issue. Professor Whitty.
Yeah, we did a report on this. When DPI came out a few years ago saying that there were 2% or less than 2% of the kids identified in the voucher program, whereas Milwaukee had 20% identified. That means formally have an IDEA, right? They have an education plan, an IEP, okay? We felt that was wrong, and we had some data that applied it, because we had these kids that were in the public school and then switched to the private school. And we were able to estimate that, in fact, the private schools were taking care of kids with disabilities at a rate of about between 8 and 14%, depending on how we did it. And we also felt that the MPS school, with 20%, were probably over-identifying. They were under-identifying in the private schools because of 2 reasons. No money, okay? In some cases, very severe disabilities that they couldn't deal with, which is true also of the publics. And then also, there were some parents that didn't want their children to be identified. They were identified in the public system, but they didn't want to because they lose legal rights when you get identified. And so they came to the private schools in some cases because they wanted to get out from under. Now, that's not a lie. So we felt the numbers were really wrong. And we've got them in a report, a pretty sophisticated report.
So we'll close out with two more questions, and 2 questions for both Brother Bob as well as Mr. Tyson. I want you first to address your accommodation of students with disabilities. Brother Bob, you were pretty in your statement on that earlier. In one of your testimonies, one of my conversations, one of you reported that the public school system sometimes refers students with disabilities. So if you can speak to that, and then secondly, and do it in both of your at the same time, just the financial challenges of running a private school system. I'm certainly well aware of that, having worked to try and keep the Lourdes system financially solvent, and it's a struggle. It's always going to be a struggle. But if you can address both those issues, then I will close. Turn over to 2 minutes worth of comments of those who want to make them. Mr. Tyson, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, to answer the first question, last school year we had students with autism, cognitive disabilities, emotional behavior disabilities, specific learning disabilities, other health impairments, significant developmental delays, and speech and language impairments. So about 8 of the 12 possible diagnoses, we had them here. Some of the more severe students, such as students with moderate autism to severe autism, require one-on-one or small group instruction throughout most of the day. So we have 2 certified special education teachers who meet that need. We have another non-certified special education teacher who works with other students. We receive about $300,000 in federal title money. So this is federal money for low-income students who are at least one grade level behind. And some of that staffing is used to meet the needs of the special education students.
But it's not specifically for that purpose. You're just able to utilize it for that purpose. Okay.
Correct. You asked about the challenges. I mean, I think everybody in the room knows this. Urban education in any context is phenomenally challenging. The single greatest challenge that we face is the fact that we have, in aggregate, a lower income population than the district. They're being asked to educate those children with about 70% of the dollars. And when you do the math and figure out, even if you add $2,000 more per child, the number of additional teachers that we would get is absolutely stunning. And so the challenge is, how do you meet all of the needs? Because we want to meet the needs of every single child excellently. How do you do that on such a relative low dollar amount?
And again, the cost to educate a child in your system is slightly under $9,000. You get a $7,200 voucher. Is that?
Yeah, the voucher is $7,200, and then we raise about $1,700 per child, or about $1.5 million a year.
And that compares to a cost per pupil in Wisconsin in general, about $11,000. Milwaukee, it's about $12,000. Okay.
Correct.
Brother Bob, can you answer those two questions?
Yes, Senator Johnson. One of the things, and Dr. Whitty said it, really important for people to know in education, and in particular in urban schools, probably the goal for many parents is safety and security of their children. There are parents who will bring a child to a private school and who will say, my child has special need, when in fact the child is ADD, ADHD, dyslexic. It may be because I don't want the child on Ritalin or any other medication. It may be because I think the child is going to get labeled later on. It may be because I think you're going to try to kick my child out of school. What is important, and what Messmer and I have done for years, is we try to counsel parents and guardians. Number one, we do a disservice to your child if your child cannot do college prep work, if it's at the high school level or other things. That doesn't mean there aren't ways, as Dr. Whitty mentioned. If a child comes in deficient in credits, there's Saturday school, there's taking an 8th period, there are all types of things, but the child has to do it, the parent and guardian has to help provide transportation, etc. It can happen, but it's not cheap. What also is important is MPS has always referred in Milwaukee students to private schools. And I'll be very frank, sometimes it's done in a very collegial way. Other times, some of the state superintendents who have said that if were in the program, we would have Wiccan schools or David Koresh schools. Those same state superintendents called me when a student was expelled for reasons I won't give, to say, Bob, can Messmer take this kid? What the superintendent didn't say was, Bob, we'll pay you for doing it. It means because education is our business. I think at the end of the day, what is important to remember too is there are some students that even MPS or other public systems cannot educate. That's why you have a St. Francis school next to Cardinal Stritch, St. Emilian's, the former St. John's school. There are a number of places that students are educated, that are paid for, but it's very, very expensive. Whether you're talking about Milwaukee, D.C., the North Mariana Islands, it's anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000. It's expensive. But the students need to be educated.
Okay. Well, again, I just want to thank all of our witnesses for taking the time, your thoughtful written and oral testimony. questions. I could keep going on, but I want to be very respectful. We told St. Marcus we would close this out by 7, and I want to give members of the audience. What I'll do is formally close out the hearing here by saying that this hearing record will remain open for 15 days until August 4th at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and questions for the record. The committee has already received a written statement for the record from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. We appreciate that. And I welcome statements for the record from anyone else who would like their voice heard as the committee considers these issues moving forward. This hearing is adjourned. Now, no. Thanks. What I'd like to do, again, I want to be respectful of St. Marcus and the other people so everybody has a chance. So I would, and I'll time it, but if you could make your comment, first of all, tell us your name, and if you could spend 2 minutes, and please within that time frame, and I'll use that when you're getting a little,
You're
past.
asking the
Okay?
impossible
Thank you.
from a teacher, you know.
But again, I'd really ask you to speak very close to the microphone so
Joan-
all can hear. So state your name and then make your
Joan
comment.
Christopherson Schmidt, CHRISTOPHERSON, capital S MIDT.
Okay.
But for the last 60 years as a teacher here in Milwaukee and abroad, I have been known as Miss Chris. And I didn't really mean to be the first speaker, but maybe I should be because I've probably taught longer than any of you. 60 years, a long time, from kindergarten, early childhood, all the way up through the grades, through high school, college, the university, television, and radio, out in the country wherever kids needed to have some art and activities. I'm a little confused at this because I was brought up going to a public school that whatever we did in public office at Badger Girls State, it was for public good, which means all. And if I were still teaching, I would love to teach at your school, Dr. Tyson. Those children are very, very fortunate, the same to yours. But public school can't say it's either you be good or you're out. They would be sued. I thought, Senator, that your job was to defend public schools, and I don't see anyone here from the public school, which is we have to have by law. It's a civic right, and it has to take every child, and it's the base of our democracy. And if we take that away, even if we don't mean to, we are going to destroy our democracy, and we're going to have the beginning of school and power from the top down. The Dean of Education at Edgewood College said it very well. He said, the system that we're going into privatizing is, here's the test. Public school, teach it, but we're not giving you the same tools. Let me tell you, the children in Milwaukee, the poor kids, many of them children raised by children, if they were given the same opportunities, the art, the music, the phy-ed, access to good books, and maybe breakfast, and be sure that there's a home for them at night, they would rise like every child in any school. I've taught in both. It just takes a connection between a teacher and one. But when teachers in the public school have 30, 40, 50 kids in a class, they can't possibly go out like I used to, into the core, into the homes, to see a parent and a child if they weren't there. I know you want me to cut off,
Well,
but
no,
you know...
I want to make sure everybody else has a chance to speak. So when you see this,
Public
I
school.
really don't want to be banging the gavel on anybody. So, please, if you'd let the next person come and speak.
Okay.
Really, we were giving 2 minutes per person, so everybody has a chance, okay?
But please support public school.
Yes, and again, I would, happily, and encourage you to submit. I would encourage you to submit a record, and we'd appreciate that. If you'd like to submit a written comment for the record, you're happy to do that. Okay. I said we encourage you to submit a written statement for the record. Okay, sir. No. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Senator. It's Don Pridemore. That's Pride.
You don't have to spell. You don't have to spell the name. That's fine.
Okay. Just like it sounds. Anyway, I'm recently retired state legislator for 10 years. Every education committee that the legislature has offered, including education reform. I've been to many MPS schools, choice schools, charter schools, Montessori schools, and my comment is that if you really want to judge how a student does in our system, all you have to do is talk to them, talk to their parents, see how excited they are to learn, what their plans are once they leave school. And if that's the one fallacy that I see in our education system, it's that we don't track these kids once they leave school. What happens to them? How successful are they? To me, that's much more important than a one-day test to see what they may have learned, or maybe they didn't sleep well the night before. That to me is the highest priority in terms of really judging how well our schools are doing, regardless of where they are educated. But I support the choice program. I always have in the legislature. And what I see in students in a choice school is a level of character, a level of discipline, and just an excitement to be in or have the opportunity to be in a school where teachers really care about them. And my question is Dr. Whitty, is your report available online or published at this point?
The testimony here in a long form is part of this record, or I can send you the copy as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And again, I really don't want to bang the gavel on anybody. When you see me pick it up, it's already 2 minutes, so if you can wrap up, I'd appreciate it. Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Cheryl, Cheryle, Rebholz, Rebholz.
Okay, you really don't have to spell your name, so. Oh, did you? Oh, okay, he's wrong.
This is a school setting, I'm listening. Just recently in my back home from Mequon Thiensville community, we had in our local newspaper, News Graphic, a lot of back and forth and op-ed pieces about charter, choice, voucher, public. I submitted something that I want to read. Education is the key that opens doors for young people and allows them to achieve their dreams. The latest U.S. ranking, 14th in comparison to 34 industrialized nations. Education Secretary Arne Duncan called the performance of American students a wake-up call. Wisconsin is one of the only states confronting and introducing reforms that can improve schools so they work better for students. Overhauling harmful policies and bringing common sense changes to our public education increases the chance at the American dream. Clinging to outdated laws and policies protect the status quo. I support and endorse charter schools and vouchers for those families wanting to withdraw from failing public schools with the conditions that they're held to the same standards outlined by DPI, especially if they are to receive taxpayer-funded money. Parents should not have to enroll their children in failing and unsafe public schools solely because of their geographical address. Local schools should offer an excellent, diverse education in their community to eliminate the need for parents to outsource their children to other districts. Because this is not the case, charter schools are a solution. Charter schools on average receive $8,000 per pupil compared to my district of $10,796 in the Mequon Thiensville School District, and cannot levy taxes for the difference, unlike the public school system. It is not a lack of money that equates to better education. Wisconsin is one of the top 4 states spending the most money on public education, yet Wisconsin is not in the top 4 when it comes to most proficient and successful academic outcomes. The return on our investment is lagging. adapt, live, and please with.
Okay, I would ask you to submit that for the record.
Okay,
You've
I
got it
will.
written, so I'd appreciate that.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you for your comment. Again, when I lift this up, I really don't want to bang the gavel. Hello.
Yes. Hi, my name is Marion Miller, and I'm autistic.
Close to the microphone, please. Thank you.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Erin Miller, and I'm autistic. I've been in both public and private schools. I have friends who send their children to both public and private schools, including my former teacher who is at a private school in the audience, as you can see here. My bent is not that private schools are bad. My question is, in regards to our recent budget, with shoving things into the budget, like special needs vouchers in the middle of the night. Again, my objective is not private schools are bad. My objective is what is happening with our educational system and with our nation. And I'm starting to ramble. I may have to cut off short. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Next.
My name is Lynn Milner. Okay. I think this panel is so stacked. It's all about vouchers and for-profit schools. The two women young women that you have here are like, they excel in academics. Wouldn't it have been better if you took someone who was failing in MPS and then went to a voucher school and was now succeeding? I don't understand what you're showing. These women would succeed anywhere they went. No, any place they would succeed because they're that kind of people. So, and I also want to say, to my understanding, kids go to these schools, right? And if they don't fit in, if they don't do well enough, they don't get to. And so what that is in New Orleans, they don't have a public school system, and they have thousands of kids who have been thrown out, have school to go back to. Also, I'm a retired MPS teacher. My daughter went to a parochial school for 4 years, and she went to the Shorewood Public Schools. So insulted. I have heard over and over again that public school teachers don't care about their kids. I've worked with parochial school teachers. As a parent, I've worked with public school teachers. I think I'm more caring than any of them. And I've been with Milwaukee public school teachers. I don't understand that there's this big agreement that public schools are inferior. I don't know how you can say that.
I don't believe anybody said that here, and
They
nobody
did.
denigrated teachers, but your
yes,
time's up again. So
I heard it
I would
several times.
recommend submit a written statement for the record. Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello.
My name is D'Augusta Stevenson, my daughter.
You may raise the microphone there, and then speak right into it. Thank you.
D'Augusta Stevenson and my daughter attend St. Marcus. First of all, I want to St. Marcus is a really good school. My only concern is that the time that I've been here, and it hurts my heart to know that I had to fight with MPS because I'm one of the parents that wanted her to be recognized as a special education student. She was diagnosed with dyslexia, and she had a special education as far as with her math. But for whatever reason, when she came over to St. Marcus, there was no special education funding or program in place. They had to use other resources, and instead, it hurt to know that I had to fight with MPS, Jennifer Dennis Duff, who is DPI, Christina Flood, who is also over the section of special education, and even went to the school board. And Sandy O'Brien here can attest because I called her so much. And when I got over here, we had to put other resources in place. That's not fair. My daughter deserved an equal education coming from MPS over to a choice school. I made that decision because if I had to go out of my pocket to pay for things, then I wanted to make sure she was getting the best that she can, and she's entitled to that. Someone had mentioned up here about the American Disability Act. One of the lines state in the parent resource as far as that you have to ensure that everyone is entitled to the freedom and the equality of education. I think you are having them address the questions and not addressing it as to how you plan on addressing the lack of funding for choice schools for them to ensure that every student, regardless of their disability, is being serviced at the proper level to excel as other students. That's my question.
Well, thank you. Well, that was the purpose of the hearing, is to kind of lay out those realities. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Sir.
Good evening. I'm Dewey Strobel. I'm the state senator for the 20th Senate District. And as an elected official, I don't advocate for public schools. I don't specifically advocate for private schools. I specifically advocate for the kids in the system that we want to get a good education. And I think we need to understand that it's not one size fits all. And we need to know what's best for each individual child here. Now, we have great public schools. We also have great voucher schools. We have great charter schools. We have options out there. And I think options are what we want. Studies have shown that when you have options, you raise all boats, and they're all better options. And so that's what I think we have to continue to advocate for, that competition, which makes everyone better, as the studies have shown. And I think what I'd like to see in the future is a little more, I don't think the vouchers are necessarily looking for, cheerleaders in the private sector, but let's have a little less pushing back on them so they have a chance to thrive just the same. When I see what goes on here in Milwaukee versus some of our charter and our choice schools, they're fighting a battle every day to succeed. I think if everybody could just step back and understand that there's a route for both private and public schools, and that together, when they both succeed, they will succeed to a greater degree. I think we both understand that. We both sit back and we don't fight in that basis, but move ahead together. I think we're going to do great things for Wisconsin and great things for this city. That's the way I see it. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak here, and let's all, again, work together and make this whole system better on both ends of the spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Is Senator Dewey the last, or is there anybody else? Please. I didn't know that you're standing back there.
Hey. Good evening. I just appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I hadn't planned on speaking, so I felt compelled to come up here. I am an alum of Milwaukee Public Schools. I went to UW-Madison, and I have 3 children who attend Milwaukee Public Schools right now. I am not a proponent for public money being funneled out. It's been over $1 billion since the start of this that comes out of public schools. We're essentially funding 2, 3, now maybe with virtual schools having no cap, maybe 4 new school systems. At some point, the public schools will not be financially solvent. You need a certain amount of students involved in that to keep it going. Charter schools, private schools, they can pick their students. They get counseled out. And that money doesn't follow the student. The money stays at the school. So that's an extra disadvantage. It's a funding flaw that I gave testimony to already in the last budget at the Capitol. Public dollars support public school. It's a civil right. And my children, they've done without librarians, without art, without music, because of money being funneled out of the public system. And I echo the sentiments of the other women that were up here. These women who are up on the panel, they would have succeeded. I mean, my children are going to succeed from MPS. There are children who aren't, and there's also shining star schools in MPS, as there are, maybe St. Marcus is doing better than some of the other voucher schools. There's my children's K-8 school. They have almost 400 children there. They have a wait list of over 100 kids to get in. So you can pick those same kinds of things out in public schools. I don't like to see that money coming out of public school system to fund another. I think all that money should go to resources to support all the children of Milwaukee. Kids who come to St. Marcus have parents who are concerned about their education. A lot of kids in MPS, their parents they're not existent. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Thank you for your comments. Again, I want to thank everybody for taking the time here to attend. I hope you found it informative. Again, encourage you, if you have any written comments you want to submit to the record, it'll be open till August 4th at 5 p.m. Again, thank all of our panel here, and have a very good evening. Take care.
Thank you.